Good afternoon to you. Mark Sudduth, HurricaneTrack.com, here with your hurricane outlook and discussion for Monday, November 19th, 2018. Yes, it is still hurricane season. No, we don't have anything brewing in the eastern Pacific nor in the Atlantic Basin. Hurricane season officially ends here on November 30th, and that will be that in terms of this year's hurricane season. But we will always have stuff to talk about, whether it's lower 48 weather, which I'll get into more in just a moment here, focusing on kind of being on the lookout for big, impactful storms and other things that would affect the lower 48. That's why I call it lower 48 weather. And in this instance, really looking to see if we have any relief from the dryness and the fires out in California. And then, of course, the big question mark as to when will we get one of these big coastal storms that dumps a lot of snow and brings wind and surge and big waves, etc. Like I say, wintertime's cousin to the hurricane. We'll be looking out for that. But it's still hurricane season just for a few more days. And luckily, as you can see on the satellite animation here, nothing brewing at all, strong upper level winds. Everything's generally west to east right now. You can clearly see that just in the cloud shot here, even over here southwest to northeast. And then your lower level trade winds are coming in from the east to the west, and that's where you get shear. Winds going in opposite directions like that. The water temperatures are still very warm throughout this region, no doubt about it, above the 80-degree Fahrenheit threshold, but upper level winds and drier air intrusion will preclude any development from taking place. You see down here across parts of the Isthmus of Panama, Costa Rica area, some convection, but even the deep tropical convection now limited to the far reaches of the intertropical convergence zone. Very nice day down here in the northeast Caribbean and elsewhere across the tropics, the greater Antilles, Florida Keys, maybe just some high clouds moving through, and that is about it. We'll come back to this map, this satellite animation, in just a moment. I do want to show you the sea surface temperature anomalies that gets updated every Monday and Thursday from the NOAA-NESDIS database, if you will. I'll refer to this at least once a week as we look ahead towards not necessarily next season in terms of, what's the forecast going to be, because I do not make forecasts, but we look out for the puzzle pieces that give us these larger signals. And one of those would be sea surface temperatures, and of course, perhaps more importantly, sea surface temperature anomalies, the departures from normal or average. What's normal, right? The departures from average. And we see today, this just got updated today, and I think the one thing that sticks out the most, at least for me, is this warm spike here along the equatorial region in the tropical Pacific, the growing El Nino. It's not declared El Nino officially, but it's coming. And it's not the strongest, not even near the strongest, but it's there. It's an abnormal warming of the tropical Pacific due to a number of factors that have been in place for the last several months and have now aligned enough to give us some pretty significant warming here in the Nino 1-2 area, the Nino 3 area, and the Nino 3-4 area, and the Nino 4 area. And that's all. This is relative. That's generally what this looks like. Google that sometime, the ENSO regions, ENSO regions, and you'll see what I'm talking about. You have different areas that define where the El Nino Southern Oscillation phenomenon is prevalent. And depending on where there is the most concentration or the highest concentration of heat, will give you different results on a global level. Yeah, this is like a big radiator down here, or a thermostat, that does have global implications because that warmer than normal water adds heat to the atmosphere over thousands and thousands of miles in the lower parts of the atmosphere. Sensible heat, red is warm. That's how we have defined it as humans, I guess. Red is warm and blue is cold. And this thermostat has been turned up just a little bit, so that'll have some big implications. Not the biggest, but pretty big overall as we get into the winter for the northern hemisphere up here, in the spring and summer for the southern hemisphere. In the Atlantic Basin, a fairly cold look to the northeast part of the Atlantic Basin, and maybe even enough down into the main development region. But as we saw from this year, it really doesn't matter much until apparently you get to August. We really learned a lot about, too much emphasis getting placed on this region this year, the fact that it was so cold relative to average early on, and a lot of the hurricane seasonal forecasts were downplayed, and look what happened. We still ended up with above normal overall activity on pretty much every metric that you could base that on. And of course we had a couple of devastating landfalls with Florence in here to the Carolinas, and of course Michael in the eastern panhandle of Florida. Nobody could have seen those coming in terms of the particulars. So anyway, it is interesting to track this because generally speaking, yes, when the Atlantic Basin is generally colder and the Pacific is warmer, so we'll put a positive here and a negative here, it should reduce the amount of hurricane activity. So we'll watch this over the coming months. We'll visit this once per week, and we'll see how things evolve. Now, this is the surface. Here's what it looks like below the surface with the subsurface, that's what it's called, temperature anomaly along that same area of the equator. And this is the snapshot most recently updated on the 9th of November, and we'll get a new one by the time I do this update next week. But you can see, there's a lot of subsurface anomalous warming, and it's really concentrated over here to the eastern parts of the Pacific at about 100 meters deep or so, and shallow from there, 100 meters and up. But it's interesting, in the western Pacific, not so much. And so is this the end of the train, so to speak? Because this generally migrates from west to east over time, very slowly. It's like a conveyor belt. And if there's not any reinforcing warmth over here, does this eventually just exhaust itself? It'll take several months to do so, and we get into the spring next year, and poof, the El Nino is gone. Well, we'll just have to wait and see. There is some speculation in the forecasting that we will see a tremendous westerly wind burst up here at the surface that will help to drive more warmer water from west to east up here, where basically we will have lower pressure over here in the eastern Pacific, allowing the air to move from higher pressure in the west pack to the lower pressure in the east pack. And that would help to drive more of that warm water that normally resides in the western Pacific eastward. I know it sounds confusing, but it's a big conveyor belt, and it'll be interesting to see how long does it stay into this motion. How long does this motion persist, where we're generating this El Nino signature here, this sort of loop, if you will. It's very complicated, but that's the simplest way that I can describe it. This downwelling that you get over here typically ends with warming over here. And we'll see. This is a neat graphic that we can look at a couple times per month and see how things are going, because I usually look at this as the future. Like whatever happens here ends up over here several weeks later. All right, so actual temperatures now. Yeah, you know this if you live along the Gulf. It's generally cooled off in most of the beach areas except for extreme South Florida. The 26 degrees Celsius, or roughly 80 degrees Fahrenheit line here keeps retreating southward as we get closer to winter. Totally expected. And if we look at the anomalies map back over here real quick, the Gulf of Mexico generally right at or just slightly above the long-term average. Nothing shocking either way. But if you're wanting to go to the beach, you're going to need a wetsuit or be able to tolerate some chilly water temperatures. And in some cases, below 70 degrees Fahrenheit. Some of these purples and blues in here. But down in extreme South Florida, the Keys, and then the southeast coast from, we'll call it Vero Beach, maybe West Palm Beach south, water temperatures 80, 81 degrees Fahrenheit. And then, of course, down here in the areas near Cuba, Cayman Islands, which would be around here somewhere, don't quite show up on this map, nice and toasty with water temperatures running about 82 degrees Fahrenheit. We will track this. Why would this be important when it's not hurricane season? Well, warm water equals energy, and if this persists and we don't get a lot of cold air draining in here early and kind of mixing all this up and cooling it, just like blowing across the top of a cup of coffee to cool it off, if that does not happen here sooner rather than later, then this will be a big fuel source for potential huge winter storms later in the season, maybe even impacting Florida with some of these waves of low pressure that develop and come across and develop into storm systems. So that'll be something that I'll be watching closely, because it'll affect the southeast and the Gulf Coast, the I-10 corridor, and the Sunshine State. And maybe as those storms form and come up the coast, you could have some big nor'easters come out of it. You never know. And the same thing is true for water temperatures here off the East Coast, which right now, actual temperatures, there's your 26 Celsius line, so still just about 80 degrees Fahrenheit right there, fairly close to the coast. You know, if you were up here at Hatteras Village and took a boat, you know, just a couple tens of miles, it looks like to me, maybe 20 miles to the east, southeast, you're in the Gulf Stream. You could jump off the back of the boat, and the water would be 80, 81 degrees Fahrenheit. That's not too shabby. Whereas the Pamlico Sound over here, water temperatures definitely have cooled off significantly into the 60s Fahrenheit. So there's a 20-degree difference over a fairly short distance, and we call that a temperature gradient, which is pretty sharp there. In fact, let me zoom in on that. This kind of stuff fascinates me, because you'll see during the wintertime how this really will impact the genesis and the evolution of storms. So yeah, there's 26 Celsius right there, and these little islands, you know, here are 27, and Hatteras Village roughly down here, Ocracoke, etc. If you went into a boat, 25, 30 miles east-southeast, if that, you'd be in some pretty warm water. But in the Pamlico Sound, you wouldn't freeze to death, but it would be very, very uncomfortable. And then, of course, up here off the coast of New England, water temperatures cooling down pretty substantially as well. But I will be watching the north wall of the Gulf Stream over the winter time, because these storms that will kind of round the corner here and try to develop in these areas to the south of Long Island and Rhode Island and Cape Cod, the more energy that's available, you know what they can do? They can really bomb out, and you can get some impressive storms that do cause hurricane-like damage. That's why I'm so interested in them, because they definitely mimic tropical cyclones, even though they get their energy sources, etc., from not completely different sources, but the warm water does certainly lend to the strength of some of these storms. Anything like that brewing? Nope, not right now. This will actually be, for most of the lower 48 here, and Alaska and Hawaii, the rest of the 50, a pretty good travel week, which is good after what we have been through. And I have to laugh a little bit, because it is just, when you think about it, we started off the year with a heck of an ice storm and snowstorm across this area, big blizzard. In March, we had the significant storm up here, plenty of storms. I'm just trying to think back, from some of the flooding events. Not a big tornado season in the Great Plains, but a severe weather season nonetheless. Then, of course, hurricane season with Florence, and then Michael down here, and then the wildfires out west. A good travel week for Thanksgiving is very much appreciated by Mother Nature. So thank you. All right. And this blank map, generally speaking, it's never going to be, where there's just no watches or warnings. But when you see just a few of them, these little boxes here, and they're all clickable, winter storm warnings, that's Alaska, this is nice to see, because later in the winter this will fill in big time, and we'll have a lot of travel problems eventually. But I don't think it's going to be that way this coming week. And if we put the GFS into motion, first of all, it's the North American domain that I'm showing you here. There's Massachusetts, the Carolinas, Florida, Gulf Coast, etc., California, West Coast out here. I'm going to scroll down so we can watch this in motion. This is the precip. The greens and the darker blues, etc., show you the precip. And you can see some of the highs and lows and some of the fronts. and this is the next 2 weeks. And I just wanted to kind of show you, a little bit of storminess over the east, but more importantly, I think, is the idea that we do start driving some precip into California. And so let's just get up here and take a look at where we are in the time sense of things. This is 3 days out. So as we go through the week, a little bit of moisture into Northern California. Take what you can get, I guess. Some storminess in the southeast. No major winter storms that come up the coast, as you can see. Doesn't mean that it won't happen. And this is 2 weeks out. I'm just showing you the whole GFS run, just to kind of look and see, does anything jump out that we need to really keep an eye on? A lot of times we'll get a storm that will develop in the northwest Gulf and right across and then up the coast, and then it bombs out up here. I don't really see too much evidence of that. A couple of them try towards the end of the run, but that's like looking at hurricanes, day 10 and beyond. But out west, a little bit of relief here. That's good. Again, you'll take whatever you can get in the form of liquid and the frozen precip up in the Sierras, etc. Every ounce, every drop will help. Even just getting the humidity values up out west will be a welcome thing to come. All right, so real quick, I saw on Patreon's tweets today that is they have designated today as sort of a national thank you patrons day, and the patrons are the people that support the creators. A lot of YouTubers are turning to this. Well, they're turning into more successful YouTubers because of it, creating all kinds of things from art, animation, music, and in my case, weather. And I mentioned this the other day on Twitter that I use Patreon, utilize it. Levi Cowan does, as well as the folks at Weather Nerds. And I'm pretty sure there's certainly probably other people in the weather world that rely on Patreon. And so I wanted to just give you a little heads up about something that I'm going to be doing, and I'm going to actually put this on Patreon today as an update to my plans for the off season and beyond. This update, I'm not going to do these every day. Obviously, when it's not hurricane season, there's just not enough to talk about. But I will do the update at least once a week, every Monday, and we call it the off-season edition of the Hurricane Outlook and Discussion. And starting with the very first one, and I don't know if December 1st is a Monday or not, to be honest with you, but December 1st, whatever day of the week it is, will be the first of the off-season editions. And for our patrons and our subscribers, which in some cases that overlaps to our HurricaneTrack Insider site, and some of those folks have been subscribers for more than a decade, I'm going to start doing this live. I used to do it live many years ago. For whatever reason, I got away from that, but I'm going to start doing it live again. I think there's a different way that I can do this. It'll bring me into the view more and more, which I think is important, so you can get to know me, and not so much what I look like as it is being able to show emotion and use my hands to talk, like you see on TV. But the difference that this is between television, I can go as long as I want. I can generally do it whenever I want, but we'll try to have a little bit of a schedule. I don't know exactly what time of day, but there's not that element of, well, I've only got 2 minutes and then we have a commercial. And that is because this is supported by you all, our patrons. And this will be, the live video feed will be through YouTube on an unlisted link just for our patrons. And that'll be any level. It doesn't matter if it's $1 per month, all the way up to some of our patrons that are pledging well over $100 a month. It doesn't matter. And so I just wanted to let you know that we're going to start doing it live once a week during the off season, more frequently if we have a big storm system to talk about. And then next hurricane season, pretty much every day that I do this, it'll be live. And it's going to be a new format. Going to try to get away from this screencast idea and be more like I'm talking to you in a small meeting setting, because I'm not going to have 10,000 people watching. That'd be great, but you'll see. It's going to be really nice. I'm looking forward to it, and it'll be challenging as well. And who doesn't like a good challenge? I know I do, and we have gotten through some of those challenges and overcome challenges because of our patrons, in large part, especially this year, because of our patrons. So I really thank you, and if you're interested, now's a great time to become a patron. And you'll be included in that thank you. So there you go. All done for today. It's going to be nice to wrap hurricane season up, continue to work on the documentary. I'll talk more about that as we get into the month of December, what my plans are for it, etc., and we will go from there. All right, so I'll probably take the rest of the week off to work on that documentary and other things, always thinking about hurricanes and what to do next season to make things better for coverage and data collection, etc. I don't care what day of the week it is. It's always on my mind. And hopefully in the end, that'll benefit you all. Have a safe week if you're traveling. Again, it looks like a decent travel week overall, which is great news. I am Mark Sudduth, HurricaneTrack.com. Again, thank you all for your support. On whatever level, even just watching these videos and leaving positive comments, that makes makes me just as happy as the funding. Believe it or not, it's a what do you call it? It boosts the spirit. So thank you so much. Have a great rest of your week, and we'll talk again next Monday.